name is George Mitchell. This story has changed me forever. My name is George Mitchell, and I am 63 years old. This is the story of an event that changed my life forever, an encounter that occurred in September of 1994. I've spent the better part of my life working as a park ranger, a career that began in a modest patch of forest and eventually led me to the vast expanse of Olympic National Park in the Pacific Northwest. It's a rugged territory filled with dense, untouched forest, perfect for someone who craves a bit of solitude. Most of what we do as rangers involves light patrols, campsite maintenance, and the occasional bit of search and rescue. When hikers get a bit too ambitious and lose their way, it's not glamorous work, but it's honest and rewarding. There's something about being out there, surrounded by nature in its purest form, that speaks to the soul. The crisp air, the rustling leaves, the distant call of birds. It's a symphony of life that can't be replicated anywhere else. That fateful autumn morning started like any other. I woke early, as was my habit, to the sound of raindrops pattering against the roof of my cabin. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, a smell I'd come to associate with home. I went through my morning routine mechanically. A quick shower, a hearty breakfast of oatmeal and strong coffee, and a final check of my gear. It was during this last task that the call came in from dispatch. "Mitchell," the voice crackled. "Over the radio, we've got a situation." A group of teenagers went out on an unapproved overnight hike and failed to return on schedule. My heart sank. It wasn't an uncommon occurrence, but it never got easier each time you hoped for the best, but prepared for the worst. "How long have they been out?" I asked, already reaching for my pack. "They've been due back for 2 days now. No contact since they ventured in 3 days ago." I nodded to myself. Cell signal is a fickle thing deep in the woods. So after initial contact is lost, we typically give them a couple of days in case they've just run into delays. But after waiting it out, it was time to go in. "I'm on it," I responded. "Who's my partner for this one?" "Cooper," came the reply. "He's already been briefed and is heading your way." Ben Cooper, a seasoned ranger and one of the best in the business. If anyone could help me find these kids, it was Ben. I felt a small surge of relief knowing he'd be by my side for this operation. As I waited for Ben to arrive, I double-checked my gear: standard equipment for a search and rescue, emergency supplies, first aid kit, radio, extra batteries, water purification, tablets, high-energy rations, and a topographical map of the area. I also packed a rifle, more for animal encounters than anything else. Even back then I felt uneasy about carrying it. There was something about bringing a weapon into that pristine wilderness that felt wrong, but it was protocol, and easier to hike with it than get in trouble for not following procedure. Ben arrived just as I was shouldering my pack. He was a tall, lean man with a weather-beaten face that spoke of years spent in the outdoors. His eyes, startling blue, were sharp and alert as they met mine, ready to go find some wayward teens. He asked, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I nodded, trying to match his light tone. Let's hope they're just having too much fun to remember to check in. We both knew the reality could be far grimmer, but neither of us voiced those thoughts. In this job, optimism wasn't just a comfort, it was a necessity. As we set out, the mist was just beginning to lift from the forest floor revealing the vibrant greens and rich browns of the woodland. The trail ahead of us disappeared into a sea of towering trees, their branches forming a cathedral-like canopy. Overhead, it was beautiful, inspiring, and just a little bit terrifying. Little did I know, as we took our first steps into the wilderness, that this search would lead us into the heart of a mystery that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The first day of our search was uneventful, almost frustratingly so. We moved fast, staying light on our feet and covering as much ground as possible. Our plan was to cover the known route first, then begin a grid search in the areas where the teenagers were more likely to have strayed. As we hiked, Ben filled me in on more details about the missing group. There were 4 of them, 2 boys and 2 girls, all aged between 16 and 17. They were local kids, which was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, they had some familiarity with the area. On the other, that familiarity might have bred over confidence. Their parents mentioned they were headed for Crescent Lake, Ben said, as we navigated a particularly dense patch of underbrush. Apparently, it's become something of a local legend among the high school crowd. Secluded, beautiful, perfect for an illicit camping trip. Frowned Crescent Lake. That's way off the approved trails. How did they even know about it? Ben shrugged. Internet, probably. You know how it is these days. Every secret spot ends up on some blog or social media. I shook my head, feeling every bit of my 33 years. The world was changing fast, and not always for the better. When I was a kid, we respected the wilderness, understood its dangers. Now, it seemed like every teenager with a smartphone thought they were Bear Grylls. As we pressed on, we called out, periodically, our voices echoing through the trees. We whistled, we scanned for any sign of disturbance, snapped branches, footprints that deviated from the trail, discarded trash. Nothing. The forest remained stubbornly, oppressively silent. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, barely visible through the thick canopy, we made the decision to make camp. We found a small clearing just big enough for our 2-person tent and a small campfire. As we sat around the crackling flames, eating our rations, our conversations were a mix of practical discussions about the next day's search, patterns, and idle talk about our families. It was during these quiet moments that Ben the veteran would often regale me with stories from his early ranger days. You know, he said, poking at the fire with a stick, I've been doing this job for over 2 decades now, and I still get surprised. Sometimes I looked up from my meal, intrigued. How so? Ben's eyes took on a distant look, as if he was seeing something beyond the dancing flames. About 5 years back, I came across this campsite. It was well destroyed. Doesn't quite cover it. The tent was ripped to shreds, sleeping bags torn, apart gear scattered everywhere. I felt a chill run down my spine despite the warmth of the fire. Bear attack, Ben shook his head slowly. That's what I thought at first, but there was no blood, not a drop. And some of the damage, it didn't look like animal claws or teeth. It was almost deliberate. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. Finally, I cleared my throat. What do you think it was? A small, wry smile crossed Ben's face. Well, the official report says unknown animal encounter, but between you and me, I've Got no idea, and that's what scares me. Most we tried to lighten the mood after. That joking about the possibilities, runaway bear with OCD maybe, or perhaps the ever-reliable Bigfoot redecorating campsites in a fit of artistic expression. But the unease lingered, a subtle undercurrent to our forced laughter as we settled into our sleeping bags that night. Ben's voice cut through the darkness. Just get some sleep. George, tomorrow's going to be a long haul. Was right. Of course, even a few hours of fitful sleep was a necessity out here. But as I lay there listening to the nocturnal sounds of the forest, my mind kept circling back to those kids. Where were they? Were they huddled together somewhere cold and scared, or had something worse befallen them that night? I dreamt of their voices, calling out for help amidst the towering trees. In my dream, I ran towards the sound, but no matter how fast I moved, the voices always seemed to be just out of reach, fading into the impenetrable darkness of the forest. Day too dawned, grey and misty, the sun, a pale disc, barely visible through the thick canopy. Above we broke camp, quickly, eager to resume our search. The weather had taken a turn for the worse. Overnight, a light drizzle falling steadily, turning the forest floor into a treacherous mix of slick leaves and mud. As we hiked, the terrain grew steadily more challenging. We were moving away from the, maintained trails, now into the true wilderness. The slopes became steeper, the underbrush thicker. Every step required careful consideration, and our progress slowed to a frustrating crawl. We're getting close to where Crescent Lake should be, Ben said, consulting his map. If the kids made it this far, they would have had to camp somewhere around here. Keep your eyes peeled for any signs of recent activity. I nodded my eyes, scanning the surrounding forest. The rain had picked up, reducing visibility and making it harder to spot any potential clues. The constant patter of droplets on leaves created a white noise that seemed to deaden all other sounds as the day wore on. The forest seemed to close in. Around us, the trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead to form a dense canopy that blocked out most of the daylight, even with the sun. At its zenith, the forest floor was cloaked in twilight shadows. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the steady rhythm of our breathing and the squelch of our boots in the mud. I found myself straining my ears for any sound out of place. A distant shout, the crack of a branch, anything that might indicate human presence. It was in this state of hyper-alertness that I nearly missed it. A flash of color so out of place in the muted greens and browns of the forest that at first I thought I'd imagined it. I raised my hand, signaling Ben to stop. "What is it?" he whispered, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle slung across his back. I pointed silently. There, caught on a thorny bush about 20 feet off the trail, was a scrap of bright blue fabric. It fluttered weakly in the light breeze, a stark contrast to its natural surroundings. Ben and I exchanged a look. This was the first real sign we'd seen of the missing teens. Without a word, we moved towards it, our senses on high alert. As we drew closer, I could see that the fabric was synthetic, the kind used in high-end hiking gear. It was relatively new, with the only minor weathering from exposure to the elements. This hadn't been here long. Ben carefully disentangled the scrap from the bush, examining it closely. "No bloody," murmured, "but look at these edges. They're frayed, like it was torn off forcefully. A Chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the damp weather animal. Attack, I suggested though. Even as I said, I knew it didn't quite fit the tear. It was too clean, too deliberate for a random encounter with wildlife. Ben shook his head slowly maybe, but let's not jump to conclusions, fan out, see if we can find anything else. We split up, moving in a careful spiral pattern. Outward from the bush, it didn't take long to find more evidence. About 10 feet away, I spotted another scrap of fabric, this time a vibrant pink. A little further on, a tattered bandana patterned with cartoon characters, decidedly young and out of place in these woods. George, Ben's voice cut through the silence, tight with tension over here. I hurried towards his voice, my heart pounding. He was crouched near the base of a massive fir tree, its roots creating a tangled maze above the forest floor. As I drew closer, I saw what had caught his attention. Half buried in the leaf litter and mud was a cell phone. Its screen was a spiderweb of cracks, the casing dented and dirty. Ben carefully extracted it from the muck, turning it over in his hands. It's dead, he said, pressing the power button to no effect. But look at this, he pointed to a series of deep scratches on the back of the phone. They were parallel lines, evenly spaced, almost like claw marks. I breathed the words, barely audible. Ben nodded grimly. Whatever happened here, it wasn't good. We need to. His words were cut off by a sound that made my blood run cold. It was distant, barely audible over the steady patter of rain, but unmistakable. A scream, human, filled with terror, and coming from somewhere deeper in the forest. We were on our feet. In an instant, all thoughts of caution forgotten as we plunged into the underbrush towards the source of the sound. The forest seemed to work against us, branches whipping at our faces, roots reaching up to tangle our feet, but we pressed on, driven by a desperate need to reach whoever had made that terrible sound. The scream came again, closer this time, but cut off abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the scream itself. We burst into a small clearing, our rifles raised, ready for what we didn't know, but what we found was worse than anything we could have imagined. The clearing was a scene of chaos. A tent lay in tatters, sleeping bags and backpacks strewn about as if tossed by a giant hand, and everywhere on every surface were smears and splatters of a dark, viscous substance that I knew with a sickening certainty was blood. But it was what lay at the center of the clearing that truly froze us in our tracks. A body, or what was left of one. It was barely recognizable as human, torn and mangled beyond belief. The face was mercifully turned away, but I could see long dark hair matted with blood and leaves. I felt the bile rise in my throat, my vision swimming. In all my years as a ranger, I'd never seen anything like this. It was carnage, pure and simple, beyond the capabilities of any animal I knew. Ben was the first to snap out of the shock stupor. "We need to call this in," he said, his voice horror. Now I nodded, numbly reaching for my radio, but before I could key it on, a low rumbling growl echoed through the clearing. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Not quite animal, not quite human, but something horrifyingly in between. Slowly, almost against my will, I turned towards the source of the sound. There at the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the shadows of the trees, stood a figure. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall, its body a twisted mass of matted fur and corded muscle, but it was its eyes that captured me gleaming with an intelligence that was utterly inhuman for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. We stood, frozen, locked in a standoff with this impossible creature. Then, with a roar that shook the very air around us, it charged, run, bend, shout, snapped me back to reality. We turned and fled, crashing through the underbrush with no thought for direction or stealth behind us. I could hear the creature pursuing its heavy footfalls and guttural snarls, spurring us to even greater speed. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs trembled, the forest a blur around us. At some point, Ben yelled something about splitting up, and I veered off to the right without thinking. I could still hear him crashing through the undergrowth to my left, his presence a perverse comfort. Amidst the chaos, I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to warp, blending into a nightmarish blur of pounding heartbeats and ragged breaths. At some point, I stumbled and fell hard, pain exploding in my knee, but fear drove me back to my feet, ignoring the white, hot agony that shot through my leg with every step. Finally gasping and drenched in sweat, I burst out of the thickest part of the forest and found myself on a familiar path, one of the secondary trails we'd passed on our first day of searching. It was like a lifeline, a thin thread of sanity in this all-encompassing madness. I ran no longer, thinking of directions, simply driven by the need to put distance between myself and that thing in the woods. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd seen, but every explanation fell short. This was beyond my understanding, beyond anything I'd encountered in my years as a ranger. I don't know how long it took me to reach the ranger station. I remember a blur of faces, frantic voices, and a whirlwind of urgent questions. My words tumbled out in a confused jumble. The campsite, the body, the creature. I must have sounded like a madman. It was only when I'd finished my breathless account that I realized something was missing. Ben. Where was Ben? The next few hours passed in a haze of activity. A search team was quickly assembled, armed with high-powered rifles and tracking dogs. I wanted to go back out there to find Ben, but my injured knee and the wild look in my eyes convinced them to keep me at the station. As night fell, I sat in the small break room, untouched, cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. Every creak of the building, every shadow at the window sent a jolt of fear through me. I kept expecting to see those inhuman eyes peering in at me from the darkness. The search team returned in the early hours of the morning, empty-handed and shaken. They'd found the clearing I'd described, but there was no sign of the body. I'd seen no blood, no shredded tent, nothing to indicate the horror I'd witnessed, and no sign of Ben. Days turned into weeks. The search expanded, with teams from neighboring counties joining in. They scoured every inch of the forest, using helicopters, infrared cameras, anything they could think of. But it was as if men and whatever had attacked us had simply vanished into thin air. The official explanation was an animal attack, possibly a rogue bear or cougar. It was a flimsy explanation, and everyone knew it, but it was easier than the alternative. Even I found myself clinging to that explanation in my weaker moments, desperate for any rationalization that could make sense of what had happened. As for the missing teenagers, 3 bodies were eventually found miles from where they should have been. The official report cited exposure and animal scavenging as the cause of death. The 14th was never found in the weeks and months that followed. I couldn't bring myself to go back into the woods. The creak of floorboards in my own home would send me leaping to my feet, my heart pounding even in the safety of my living room, surrounded by familiar things. I was haunted by the echo of that creature's roar, the image of its inhuman eyes seared into my memory. They eventually forced me to take time off mandated counseling sessions that did little to ease the weight of what I'd experienced. At first, I resisted. If I wasn't actively doing something to find Ben, then what was the point? But with time, the futility, the sheer hopelessness of it all sank in. I never went back to being a ranger. I couldn't face setting foot in the wilderness. Again, the city felt wrong, cramped, stifling, but it was also safe, predictable, no unexplained disappearances, no lurking shadows at the edge of the tree line. Years passed. I'd see reports in the news sometimes, sporadic disappearances in national parks across the country, sightings of strange creatures, never clear photos, never any real proof. But I knew they never found Ben's body, and they never found that thing, whatever it was. Olympic National Park was shut down indefinitely. Trails were sealed, warnings plastered at every potential entrance. It became a ghost land, a vast expanse of wilderness deemed too dangerous to tread. Hikers and nature lovers cried foul. Petitions circulated. But ultimately, the government stood firm. Too many disappearances, too much inexplicable evidence, and no viable explanation to offer the public. The story spiraled into legend. Conspiracy theories filled the void. Cryptid hunters railed against government cover-ups. The paranormal community declared it a portal to another dimension. The creature became a boogeyman, a campfire story swapped by adrenaline-seeking thrill chasers and wide-eyed children alike. For me, there was no legend, no mystery, only a cold certainty of what lurked out there, a brutal truth that clawed at my sanity. I became a recluse, avoiding the news, wary of crowds. Each face became a blur, a potential mask, hiding the eyes of a monster. Time, they say, heals all wounds, but some wounds run too deep, leave scars that never truly fade. Now, 30 years later, I find myself drawn back to the edge of those woods. The barricades still stand, weathered and tagged with graffiti, yet as impregnable as the day they were erected. I come here, often drawn by a force I can't explain. Perhaps it's guilt for surviving when Ben didn't. Perhaps it's a desperate need for closure, for answers to questions that have haunted me for 3 decades. I stand at the edge of the forest, staring into the dense mass of green beyond my fingers trace the rough outline of the missing person poster that still flutters faintly from the weathered wood, a picture of Ben, smiling, his eyes alive in a way mine haven't been in years. They say the forest calls to you. It does. It's both a whisper and a roar, inviting and threatening all at once. And as I stand here, feeling the pull of those dark woods, I know that one day I'll answer that call. I'll step past those barriers into the embrace of the trees, seeking the truth I left behind all those years ago. Because the forest keeps its secrets, but it also reveals them to those brave enough or foolish enough to venture into its depths. And I've carried the weight of this secret for far too long. So if you're reading this, know that I've gone back to find Ben, back to face the creature back to confront the truth that's eluded me for 30 years, and if I don't return, well, let my story be a warning. The wilderness is vast and we are small, and there are things out there in the deepest, darkest parts of the world that defy explanation, things that whisper to us in the rustle of leaves and the creak of ancient trees, things that wait patient and hungry in the shadows. Listen to the whisper of the woods, but beware the roar that follows. My name is Richard Nelson, and I'm 70 years old. The events I'm about to recount happened to me in October of 2011, but they haunt me still, their memory as vivid and terrifying as the moment they occurred. I've spent countless sleepless nights reliving those dark days, questioning my sanity and wondering if I should share this story, but the weight of silence has become too much to bear. The world needs to know what lurks in the shadows of our wilderness. I've been with the National Park Service for over 4 decades now, a career that has spanned some of the most breathtaking landscapes our country has to offer, but it was Redwood National Park that truly captured my heart. There's something about those ancient giants that stirs the soul, makes you feel both insignificant and connected to something greater than yourself. The air is different there, heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine, tinged with the faintest whisper of the nearby Pacific. Most days, my job was a dream come true. I'd wake before dawn, lace up my, worn boots, and head out into the misty forest. The usual ranger duties kept me busy maintaining trails, conducting ecological surveys, and occasionally helping a lost hiker find their way back to civilization. I loved every minute of it. Even on the toughest days, the redwoods had a way of putting things into perspective, their towering presence, a reminder of nature's enduring strength. But perspective can be a dangerous thing. When the world you thought you knew turns on its head. It all started with the Richardsons. They were your typical American family, mom, dad, and 2 teenage kids armed with smartphones and an eagerness to document every moment of their vacation. I remember greeting them at the visitor center, their excitement palpable as they gazed up at the colossal trees surrounding us. You folks planning on hitting any particular trails today? I asked, already reaching for our map of the park's most popular routes. Mrs. Richardson, a petite woman with a warm smile, nodded enthusiastically. We were thinking of trying the Tall Trees Grove. I read it's supposed to be spectacular. I couldn't help but grin. The Tall Trees Grove was indeed a marvel, home to some of the tallest known trees on Earth. You've chosen well, I said, tracing the path on the map. It's about a 4-mile round trip, moderate difficulty. Just make sure you keep to the marked trail and bring plenty of water. Mr. Richardson, tall man with graying temples, chuckled. Don't worry, Ranger, we've got enough. Snacks and water to last us a week. If only they had known how prophetic those words would become. I watched them set off down the trail, the kids already engrossed in their phones, no doubt, updating their social media status. It was a scene I'd witnessed countless times before, and I thought nothing more of it as I went about my day. 2 days later, the Richardsons' rental car was found in the parking lot, undisturbed. Their hotel room remained untouched, suitcases still packed as if they just stepped out for a quick hike. The realization that something was terribly wrong settled over the park like a heavy fog. Initially, we treated it as a routine search and rescue operation families get turned around in the woods all the time, especially if they stray from the marked paths. But as hours stretched into days, an unsettling feeling began to creep over me. The forest, once a place of wonder and solace, suddenly felt oppressive, its shadows deeper and more menacing than I'd ever noticed before. 5 days into the search, we had found nothing. Not a backpack, not an energy bar wrapper, not even a footprint. It was as if the Richardsons had simply vanished into thin air, swallowed whole by the ancient forest. I was part of the expanded search crew, combing through areas of the park that hadn't seen human activity in years. The work was grueling, both physically and mentally. We pushed through dense undergrowth, scaled steep ravines, and peered into the cavernous hollows of fallen trees. All the while, the redwoods loomed over us, silent sentinels that seemed to be watching our every move. It was on the 6th day that I first noticed something off. I was working my way along a barely there game trail when a chill ran down my spine, raising the hair on the back of my neck. I froze, every instinct screaming that I was being watched. Slowly, I turned, scanning the forest around me. Nothing, just the endless sea of massive trunks stretching as far as the eye could see. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing moment. The forest had gone eerily quiet, the usual chorus of bird song and rustling leaves replaced by a suffocating silence. I found myself gripping my radio tighter, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Base camp. This is Nelson, I said, my voice sounding thin and strained even to my own ears. I'm at grid reference C7. Something's not right out here. Static crackled for a moment before a response came through. Nelson, this is Baz. Can you clarify? Are you in distress? I hesitated suddenly, feeling foolish. What was I going to say? That the trees were creeping me out, that I had a bad feeling. I was a seasoned ranger, for crying out loud, not some jumpy rookie on his first solo patrol. Negative, boss, I replied after a moment. Just checking in. Nelson out. I lowered the radio, shaking my head to clear it. But as I turned to continue my search, a flicker of movement caught my eye. It was just at the edge of my vision, a dark shape darting between two massive redwoods. My heart lurched into my throat. Hello, I called out, my voice echoing unnaturally in the still air. Is someone there? No response. I took a cautious step forward, straining my eyes to penetrate the gloom between the trees. For a split second, I thought I saw something, a figure hunched and massive, far larger than any human. But then it was gone, leaving me to wonder if it had ever been there at all. That night, huddled around the campfire with the other search team members, I wasn't the only one with a story to tell. Whispers circulated of odd sounds echoing through the forest, of shadowy figures glimpsed just out of sight. The mood in the camp was tenser, nervous energy crackling beneath the surface of our forced calm. I'm telling you, I heard something out there, insisted Sarah, one of our newer rangers. Her eyes were wide, darting nervously towards the darkness beyond our circle of light. It was like, I don't know, like a growl, but deeper. It made my whole body shake. Next to her, Mike, a grizzled veteran of countless search and rescue operations, scoffed. Come on, Sarah, you're letting your imagination run wild. Probably just a bear or something. But I caught the way his hand tightened on his coffee mug, the slight tremor in his voice. Mike was scared too, even if he wouldn't admit it as the days wore on. The feeling of wrongness only intensified. The forest seemed to close. In around us, the towering redwoods, no longer majestic, but menacing. Every shadow held the potential for danger. Every unexpected sound sent hearts racing. It was on the 10th day of the search that everything changed. I was paired with Avery Johnson, a fellow ranger I'd known for years. Avery was as solid as they come, level-headed, experienced with a dry sense of humor that helped keep spirits up even in the toughest situations. We were pushing deeper into the park than any of the other search teams had gone, following a hunch that the Richardsons might have somehow gotten turned around and ended up in one of the more remote areas. The going was tough, the undergrowth dense and unforgiving, Avery said as we paused to catch our breath. I'm starting to think those kids might have had the right idea with their phones. GPS would be real handy right about now. I chuckled, grateful for the moment of levity. What's the matter, Johnson? Don't tell me you're going soft on me. In your old age, Avery grinned, but there was a tension around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Old age, my ass. I could still run circles around you any day of the week. We pressed on the banter, helping to keep the oppressive atmosphere at bay. But as we ventured further into the heart of the forest, that now familiar sense of unease began to creep over me. Once again, the trees here were older, their massive trunks scarred and gnarled with age. Shafts of sunlight barely penetrated the dense canopy overhead, leaving us in a perpetual twilight. The air felt thick, almost sticky, and carried a musty odor I couldn't quite place. Hey, Rich, Avery called out, his voice oddly subdued. You see this? I made my way over to where he was crouched, examining something on the forest floor. As I drew closer, I felt my blood run cold. There, pressed into the soft earth, was a footprint, but not like any I'd ever seen before. It was massive, easily twice the size of my own boot, with long claw, like impressions at the end of each toe. The shape was all wrong. Too elongated for a bear, too large for any known predator in these parts. What the hell? I breathed, dropping to my knees for a closer look. Avery shook his head, his face pale. I don't know, man, but whatever made this, it's big and it's close. As if on cue, a sound echoed through the forest, a low rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before, a sound that bypassed all rational thought and struck straight at the most primal part of my brain. Run. Every instinct screamed, run now, Avery. And I locked eyes for a split second, both of us frozen in fear. Then, without a word, we were on our feet, crashing through the underbrush in a blind panic. I lost all sense of direction as we ran, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. The growl came again, louder this time, and closer, much closer. Rich Avery's voice cut through the haze of terror. We need to split up. It can't follow both of us. Before I could protest, he veered off to the right, disappearing into the gloom. I wanted to call out, to tell him it was a bad idea, but fear had robbed me of my voice. I ran on my lungs, burning my heart, pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The forest blurred around me, the massive redwoods seeming to close in, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. And then I heard It Avery's voice crackling over the radio at my hip. Rich, oh God, Rich, it's his words cut off in a scream that turned my blood to ice. There was a sickening crunch, a wet tearing sound, and then nothing but static. I stumbled to a halt, my legs giving out beneath me. I collapsed against the base of a massive redwood, gasping for air, my mind reeling from what I just heard. Avery was gone. My friend, my partner, had just been what? Killed, taken by something that shouldn't exist, something that had no place in the rational world I thought I knew. As the realization of what had happened began to sink in, a new sound reached my ears. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps coming closer. With each passing second, I pressed myself against the rough bark of the tree, trying to make myself as small as possible. My hand found the butt of my service pistol, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that it would be useless against whatever was approaching. The footsteps stopped. I could hear breathing now, deep and ragged, just on the other side of the tree. A smell hit me, then an overpowering stench of wet fur and rotting meat that made my stomach heave slowly, against every instinct screaming at me to remain. Still, I turned my head, and there, peering around the trunk of the redwood, was a face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. It was almost human, but twisted wrong in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. The eyes were too large, glowing with an unnatural yellow light. The mouth was a gaping maw filled with jagged teeth, a thin line of saliva dripping from its lower lip for a moment that stretched into eternity. We stared at each other. I saw intelligence in those eyes, a cold alien intelligence that regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and hunger. Then, with a speed that belied its massive size, it lunged. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember drawing my gun or squeezing the trigger. The next thing I knew, I was running again, blind terror giving me strength I didn't know I possessed. Gunshots hang out behind me, not mine but others. I heard shouts, the crackle of radios, the sound of something large crashing through the underbrush. And then hands were on me, human hands, pulling me to safety. Voices I recognized, my fellow Rangers, members of the search team, but their words were a meaningless blur as they loaded me into a helicopter for emergency evacuation. I caught one last glimpse of the forest. There, just at the edge of the clearing, I saw it again. The creature, it stood partially hidden behind a massive redwood, those glowing eyes fixed on me with an intensity that chilled me to my very soul. Then the helicopter lifted off, and the thing, whatever it was, melted back into the shadows of the forest. The official report would later state that Avery Johnson died in an animal attack, likely a bear or mountain lion driven to unusual aggression by environmental factors. The Richardsons were never found, their disappearance chalked up to a tragic hiking accident. But I know the truth, we all do, those of us who were. There's something lives in those woods, something ancient and terrible, something that should not be. I've told my story many times over the years, to park officials, to therapists, to anyone who would listen. Most dismiss it as the ramblings of a traumatized mind, a coping mechanism to deal with the loss of my friend in my arm. But sometimes late at night, when the wind whispers through the trees outside my window, I think I hear it, that low rumbling growl that haunts my dreams. And I know with a certainty that chills Me to my very core that it's still out. They're waiting, watching, and I wonder not, for the first time, if the great redwood forests hide more secrets than we could ever imagine, secrets that perhaps are best left undiscovered. The days following my evacuation passed in a blur of hospital, hit rooms, police interviews, and debriefings with park officials. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my mind reeling from a toxic cocktail of pain medications and traumatic memories. When I was lucid, I tried to tell them what I'd seen, what had happened to Avery, but the words felt hollow, inadequate to describe the horror we'd encountered in those ancient woods. Dr. Elena Patel, the lead physician overseeing my care, listened with a mix of concern and skepticism as I recounted my story for what felt like the 100th time. Mr. Nelson, she said gently, her dark eyes studying me over the rim of her glasses. I understand you've been through a traumatic experience, but I need you to consider the possibility that your mind may be filling in gaps, so to speak, creating a narrative to make sense of what happened. I shook my head vehemently, wincing as the movement sent a fresh wave of pain through my bandaged shoulder. You don't understand. Hand, I know what I saw, what I heard, that thing. It wasn't natural, and it's still out. There, Dr. Patel sighed, making a note on her clipboard. Richard, you suffered significant blood loss and shock. It's not uncommon for the mind to conjure vivid hallucinations under such circumstances. What you're describing, this creature, it simply doesn't align with any known species, because it's not a known species. I snapped, frustration boiling over. Why won't anyone listen to me? But even as the words left my mouth, I knew how I must sound. Crazy, delusional, a man driven to the brink by grief and trauma. The days turned to weeks, and slowly my body began to heal. But the nightmares persisted. Every night I found myself back in those woods, running from something I couldn't see, hearing Avery's final terrified scream. I'd wake drenched in sweat, my phantom limb aching where my left arm used to be. As my discharge date approached, I was visited by Marcus Harding, the regional director for the National Park Service. He was a tall, imposing man with a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard and eyes that seemed to bore right through you. Richard, he said, settling into the chair beside my hospital bed, I want you to know that we're taking your account of what happened very seriously. We've had teams combing the area where you and Avery were last seen. So far, they haven't found any evidence to corroborate your story, but we're not giving up. I let out a bitter laugh. Let me guess. No giant footprints, no sign of the creature. Harding's expression remained neutral. We found some unusual tracks, yes, but our wildlife experts believe they could have been made by a large bear, possibly deformed or suffering from some kind of gigantism. As for Avery, he paused, his voice softening. We recovered enough to confirm it was an animal attack, a particularly vicious one. It wasn't a bear, I insisted, my voice barely above a whisper. What I saw, what killed Avery, it was something else, something that shouldn't exist. Harding leaned forward, his eyes meeting mine. Richard, I've known you for years. You're one of our best, most experienced rangers. If you say you saw something out there, I believe you saw something, but we need to be careful about how we proceed. We can't risk causing a panic based on evidence we can't substantiate. I understood what he was saying. Even if I didn't like it, the park Service had a responsibility to the public, to the local economy that depended on tourism. They couldn't very well issue a statement saying there was some kind of monster lurking in the redwoods. What about the Richardsons? I asked. Any sign of them? Harding shook his head. Nothing concrete. We've expanded the search area, brought in cadaver dogs, but it's like they vanished into thin air as he stood to leave. Harding placed a hand on my shoulder. Get some rest. Richard, when you're ready, we'll talk about your options moving forward. Your job will be waiting for you if you want it, but I knew with a certainty that settled in my bones that I could never go back. The thought of those towering redwoods, of what might be lurking in their shadows, filled me with a paralyzing dread. Months passed. I threw myself into physical therapy, learning to navigate the world with one arm. The park service offered me a desk job, but I couldn't bring myself to accept. Instead, I took early retirement, retreating to a small cabin on the outskirts of a tiny town in Oregon. I tried to move on to forget, but the memories haunted me as vivid and terrifying as the day they were formed. I found myself obsessively following news from Redwood National Park, searching for any hint that what I'd encountered might have resurfaced. And then almost a year to the day after my encounter, I received a package. No return address, just my name scrolled in. A hasty hand. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small cloth-wrapped object. The note was brief, written in a shaky script I recognized as belonging to Sarah, the young ranger who had been part of the original search team. Richard, I found this near where we lost Avery. I don't know what it means, but I thought you should have it. Be careful. Something's still out there. Sarah, with trembling fingers, I unwrapped the cloth. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was a tooth, unlike anything I'd ever seen before, larger than my thumb, wickedly curved and serrated along one edge. It was no bare tooth, no mountain lion fang. This belonged to something else entirely. As I stared at the tooth, memory surfaced. The creature's face, inches from my own, its mouth filled with teeth, just like this one. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. The truth was out there, hidden in the shadows of those ancient redwoods, and I owed it to Avery, to the Richardson, to everyone who might unknowingly wander into that creature's territory to uncover it. The next morning, I packed a bag, maps, camping gear, my old service pistol. I knew it was probably suicide to go back to face that thing again, but I couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. I needed answers, even if they cost me what's left of my life. As I write these words, I'm preparing to head back into Redwood National Park. Don't know what I'll find there or if I'll make it back out, but if you're reading this, it means I didn't. And it means that the danger is real to whoever finds this account. Be warned, there are things in this world that defy explanation. Ancient terrors that lurk just beyond the edge of our understanding. And sometimes they wake up. The redwoods hold secrets, dark, terrible secrets, and I intend to uncover them no matter the cost. This is Richard Nelson, signing off. If I don't make it back, tell the world what happened here, and whatever you do, be careful in the woods. You never know what might be watching. From the shadows, the journal of Richard Nelson was discovered 6 months after his disappearance, hidden in a weatherproof container at the base of a massive redwood tree. Despite extensive searches, no trace of Nelson himself was ever found. In the years that followed, rumors persisted of strange sightings in Redwood National Park hikers reported hearing unusual sounds echoing through the forest at night. Park rangers occasionally found inexplicable tracks or signs of some large unknown animal moving through the area, but official reports continued to dismiss these accounts, attributing them to known wildlife or overactive imaginations. The disappearances of the Richardson family and Richard Nelson were officially classified as tragic accidents, the result of the unforgiving wilderness. Yet for those who have heard Nelson's story, who have seen the tooth he left behind, a question lingers: what really lurks in the shadows of the great redwood forests, and when will it emerge? Again, the ancient trees stand silent, their secrets held close, but in the deepest parts of the forest, where the shadows grow thick and the light struggles to penetrate, something moves, something waits, and the cycle of terror, it seems, is destined to begin. A new I am Charles Pfizer, and I am 66 years old. This is my account of the events that unfolded in September 2010, forever changing my life and my perception of reality. I've been with the National Park Service for nearly 10 years currently, working in the vast expanse of Big Bend National Park down in Texas. I love the desert. It feels different from other places I've worked, a stark, brutal kind of beauty. It took some adjusting after the mountains of Wyoming and the pine forests of Maine, but it's grown on me. That fateful week, I was on backcountry patrol. It's usually one of those stints where it's mainly about reminding lost hikers about hydration protocols and checking that overnight campers are following regulations, usually uneventful stuff, but necessary this time of year. The heat gets fierce and you want to head off trouble before it starts. Around midday on the third day, I got a radio transmission that sent a chill down my spine. A possible missing person report from a worried family member. The description made my blood run cold. Middle-aged couple, experienced hikers, out on the South Rim Trail for 2 days and hadn't checked in as scheduled. It was a tough trail, gaining over 2,000 feet in elevation. Plenty of spots where our unlucky slip or a heat-induced stumble could cause problems. I knew the South Rim, well, having tackled it a bunch of times myself, for the views and the sense of accomplishment. With a growing sense of unease, I drove out to the trailhead, gathered what details I could from the distraught daughter, and started my solo search. I was familiar with the protocol. Look for signs of deviation from the trail gear, anything out of the ordinary, and radio for backup. Once the situation was assessed, the first few miles yielded nothing, just a well-maintained trail. Few other hikers reported nothing amiss, and the usual sprawl of cacti and scrub brush under that merciless desert sun. Then I rounded a bend and saw it, a backpack ripped open and abandoned near a rocky outcropping. A surge of dread washed over me as I recognized the brand, the same one described by the couple's daughter. My hands shook as I radioed for backup. The words tied in my throat. It was more than a lost hiker situation now. Something bad had happened out here. I approached the outcrop, cautiously, rifle drawn, the silence broken only by the rasp of my own breath. And there they were, or rather, what was left of them. It was a slaughterhouse. Blood, splattered rocks, shattered bones, shreds of clothing snagged on thorns. I stumbled back, a wave of nausea threatening to overwhelm me. It wasn't an animal attack, nothing remotely normal. The injuries were grotesque, violent beyond anything I'd ever witnessed, even after all my years as a ranger. It was as though some impossibly powerful creature had torn them apart with brutal, frenzied rage. My mind reeled, unable to process the horror. Before me, backup arrived, an agonizing hour later. A forensics team, a grim-faced crew of fellow rangers, and the inevitable park hire UPS trying to contain the damage the gruesome discovery would cause. They questioned me, scrutinized my account, the unspoken suspicion hovering in the overheated air. Ranger loses it in the desert, creates a gruesome scene for some twisted reason. I didn't blame them. The crime scene defied belief. I knew how insane it sounded, but I also knew what I saw the nights that followed were a nightmare. Blur snatches of images haunted me, gleaming yellow eyes in the desert darkness, the guttural roar that echoed in the barren canyons, the way the searchlights swept over the rocks, highlighting the blood, but never finding whatever made those monstrous wounds. I started sleeping with a loaded gun under my pillow, jumping at every creaking floorboard, every flicker of headlights outside my window. Finally, word came down: the official cause of death, animal attack perpetrator unknown. Case closed, just like that. The evidence, they said, was inconclusive. The injuries not inconsistent with some unknown predator defending its territory. They buried the couple in the dusty cemetery on the outskirts of the park. Another grim statistic of wilderness that can never be fully tamed. But I saw the hesitation in the eyes of the forensic specialist, heard the whispers shared around campfires when they thought I was out of earshot. The other rangers, the ones I'd worked side by side with for years, started giving me a wide berth. I was the one touched by the unexplainable, tainted by an experience they couldn't even begin to fathom. My protests felt hollow. My insistence on something out there, something monstrous, landing not with the urgency of truth, but with the echoes of a mind starting to unravel in the wake of trauma. I'm writing this from a motel room in some nameless town on the edge of the desert, a few hastily packed belongings stuffed into my weathered old duffel bag. I handed in my resignation. This morning, I can't stay here, not with that constant gnawing dread coiling in my gut like a venomous snake. I can't stay and risk it coming for me. Next, they can dismiss the horror right there. Reports explain it all away with neat, bureaucratic phrases. But out there, in the vast expanse where the sun casts dark shadows and the wind whispers through the canyons, something lurks, something unnatural. And after what I saw, I think it knows where to find me. I don't know where I'll go or how long I can keep running. Maybe I'll head north, lose myself in the anonymous sprawl of a big city where the worst predators walk on two legs. Maybe I'm being paranoid. Maybe I did somehow manufacture those horrors in a mind pushed past its breaking point by the relentless desert and the brutal solitude. It doesn't matter. Every rustle of leaves, every flicker of shadow sets off a jolt of adrenaline in my veins, makes me picture those impossibly large clawed feet, that gaping monstrous maw dripping with, I think I heard a noise outside my room. I'll go. Check the floorboards creaked beneath my boots, every sound amplified in the echoing silence of the cheap motel room. I moved towards the window, my grip tight. On the gun, something was there, a flicker of movement just beyond the faded yellow curtain. My gut clenched, a scream caught in my throat. It couldn't. He couldn't have tracked me down. I closed my eyes for a split second. Futile attempt at gathering my shattered composure. No point in hiding, no use in cowering. I tore open the curtain, braced for anything empty. The dusty parking lot, silent and still. Under the harsh, fluorescent lights stretched out. Before me, a battered pickup truck hummed. In the distance, a lone figure hunched over the wheel. Ordinary, my pulse hammered in my ears as relief crashed. Over me, followed swiftly by a wave of shame. I was losing it, seeing threats in every shadow, my nerves frayed beyond repair. But then a movement caught my eye. On the edge of the parking lot, where a stand of mesquite trees cast long, skeletal shadows, a figure was watching. Too tall, too thin, standing unnaturally, still in the harsh light, and as it turned its head towards me, moonlight gleamed on two impossibly bright yellow eyes. My breath caught. It was him. No, it. The creature, it was here in this nondescript nowhere. Town it had found me. This was the end. A bitter resignation washed over me, replacing the frantic terror. I couldn't run anymore. I raised my gun, more in defiance than in any real belief that it would have an effect. The creature observed me, no sign of fear in its inhuman glare, only a cold, calculating intelligence. It took a step forward, a sinuous, unhurried movement that bellied its grotesque shape. With each step, the details became chillingly clear. The ragged, mantled fur draped over its hulking frame, the impossibly long limbs tipped with sickle claws designed for tearing its head was like a nightmarish fusion of wolf and something else, all teeth and predatory instinct. Low growl rumbled from its throat. I fired a warning shot, more of a plea than a threat. The report shattered the night. The creature flinched, but didn't retreat. It was toying with me, its hunter's instinct playing out this cruel game to the bitter end. I fired again and again. At first, it seemed as though the bullets had no effect, simply angering it further. But then it let out a shriek, a sound of rage and pain that echoed off the sea. Crumbling walls of the motel, a thin trickle of blood, eerily black in the moonlight, seeped from a wound on its massive shoulder. A flicker of something, like hope, ignited in me. It wasn't invincible. It could be hurt. Maybe. Even my desperate thoughts were cut off. As the creature charged, a blur of claws and fangs, I managed to get another shot off before it slammed into me, sending both of us crashing against the flimsy wall. Its stench enveloped me, rotting meat, something feral. I kicked out wildly, trying to dislodge it. The force of its impact had knocked the breath out of me. Stars bursting in my vision with a strength born of desperation. I fumbled for the discarded gun, my fingers slipping in the creature's hot, foul blood. The motel room door burst open, and the startled face of an elderly night clerk peered in. He screamed a shrill sound that pierced the chaos, then turned and ran, his flimsy slippers slapping against the cracked concrete. The distraction was all I needed. The creature, momentarily startled by the noise, twisted its monstrous head. I seized the gun, jamming the barrel against its matted fur, and Bandad Sadindal fired and fired again. The reports echoed in the confined space, deafening me. As the creature roared in agony, it thrashed, clawing at its face, its movements becoming less focused, frantic. I scrambled away, dragging myself across the debris-strewn parking lot. creature's pained gnarls fading behind me. I didn't know how badly I'd injured it, whether it would pursue me, but blind. Instinct propelled me forward, stumbling. Into the battered pickup I fumbled for. The keys, my hands shaking, I barely got. It started before the motel room door. Exploded outward the creature's immense form silhouetted against the now empty doorway. It staggered then, with one final chilling glare in my direction. It turned and vanished into the shadows beneath the mesquite trees. I drove through the night fueled by adrenaline and lingering terror. The headlights cut a swath across endless highway, the monotony both terrifying and comforting. Every creak of the old truck, every flicker of movement in the rear view mirror sent my heart pounding anew. My side ached and my head throbbed, but I couldn't stop, not until I was far, far away from the desolate stretch of desert and the motel parking lot marked with blood. By dawn, I'd crossed state lines and abandoned the truck in a nondescript suburb. A bus heading north seemed as good a destination as any I sank into, the worn seat trying in vain to ignore the stares directed at my disheveled appearance, the dark circles under my eyes, and the gun I still clutched with. Numb fingers, the landscape passed in a blur as I tried to process what had happened. A part of me, a fading fragment of rationality, clung to the hope that it had all been a psychotic break, a final descent into PTSD-fueled madness. The Thief news report a week later shattered that illusion. A headline screamed from a tattered newspaper left on a neighboring bus seat. The photo, grainy and horrific, showed a campsite ravaged in a sickening echo of the scene that started my nightmare. My trembling hands dropped. The paper, they'd covered it up again, contained the Imposse episode 11. The cabin beneath the cabin. After what happened on the ridge, I couldn't sleep. The forest outside my window no longer whispered, it stared. It pressed against the glass like a curious animal, waiting for an invitation. That morning, I found the floor creaking in a spot it never had before. Old rangers used to say this cabin had a secret, but I'd always chalked it up to ghost stories. Still, I moved the rug, and there it was, a trapdoor. No lock, no latch, just a handle, worn smooth with age. I opened it. Wooden steps led into darkness. The air below was cold, wet, and smelled like earth and iron. My flashlight flickered the deeper I went, but something compelled me, like I was retracing footsteps I hadn't taken yet. At the bottom was another room, same layout as the cabin above, but wrong. The furniture was moldy. The photos on the walls were of people who looked almost like the rangers I'd known, but slightly off. Eyes too wide, smiles too stiff, like wax replicas trying to pretend. And then I saw it, a desk, identical to mine. On it, a logbook. I opened it and froze. Every page was filled with entries in my handwriting, but they weren't mine. They described events I hadn't lived yet, conversations I hadn't had, warnings I hadn't heard. I flipped to today's date, 11:42 a.m. Tom finds the basement. 11:58 a.m. Tom reads this line. 12:01 p.m. Tom hears the door close upstairs. Right on cue. I heard it, the creak, the slam. I ran to the stairs, flashlight shaking. The trapdoor was shut, locked. I banged, screamed, no answer. Then I heard footsteps above me, slow, measured, and a voice, my voice calm and steady. Time to write the next page. Episode 12. The Ranger Without a Face. I don't remember falling asleep. One moment, I was pounding on the trapdoor, screaming into the dark. The next, I was waking up in the wrong bed. It looked like mine. Same frame, same blanket, but everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, like no one had touched it in years. The door upstairs was open now, but when I climbed out, the forest wasn't the same. It was brighter, too bright, like the sun was stuck at the edge of the horizon. The trees cast long, impossible shadows that didn't sway with the wind, and there were no sounds, no birds, no wind, no bugs. I checked the radio, it hummed, but the channel was all wrong. It wasn't static, it was whispering, a voice repeating my name over and over. Tom, Tom, Tom. Outside, I found boot prints, mine, leading deeper into the woods. I followed them out of fear, not curiosity. At the edge of the clearing, I saw a ranger. From behind, he looked just like me. Same uniform, same hat. But as I approached, I realized something was wrong. His skin was too smooth, like plastic, and where his face should have been, nothing, just blank flesh. He turned toward me anyway, as if he could see, then lifted a hand and pointed to my chest. I looked down, a scar I didn't remember, having stretched across my ribs, fresh, bleeding. I stumbled back, breath catching. The faceless ranger stepped closer, then stopped. From behind him, others emerged. 10. All of them. Me. Older. Younger. Some limping. Some smiling. All staring with no eyes. Then, in one voice, they spoke. You've done this before. You'll do it again. Until you get it right. Episode 13. A window that watches back. I don't know how I made it back to the cabin. Maybe I never left. The sky hadn't changed. The sun still frozen on the horizon. I couldn't tell if it was dawn or dusk. Just an endless amber glow stretching through the trees. Inside the cabin, things were worse. The furniture had moved. Not just shifted, but rearranged, as if someone tried to reconstruct the room from memory and got it slightly wrong. The bed now faced the wrong wall. My logbook sat open on the floor, pages torn out. And the mirror, there wasn't one before. Now it hung above the desk. Antique, framed in dark wood, cracked down the center. Its reflection showed the room perfectly, except for one detail. In the mirror, I was still outside, standing by the tree line, watching myself. I turned to the window. Nothing. But when I looked back into the mirror, the reflection had moved. Now the other me was at the cabin door, still silent. I stared, heart pounding, daring it to move again. It didn't, until I blinked. Now it stood behind me, in the mirror only. I spun around, empty room, back to the mirror closer. Its hand was on my shoulder. My real shoulder began to burn, like something had reached through the glass. I looked away. When I glanced back again, the mirror was empty, but on the desk beneath it, someone had scratched a message into the wood. Stop turning around. He's already in. Episode 14. The Whispering Trail. After the mirror, I boarded up every window, blocked every crack, covered the glass in blankets. I even unplugged the radio. Nothing electronic, nothing reflective. But the silence didn't stay silent. That night, I heard them. Footsteps, dozens of them, shuffling around the cabin, circling like predators too patient to strike. Then came the tapping, not on the door, not on the walls, from under the floor, like something was trying to remind me. The cabin above isn't the only one. At sunrise, I snapped. I grabbed my gear and left. No destination just away, but the forest wasn't the same. Every trail curved back on itself. Every tree looked identical, like I was running in a loop stitched into space. And then the whispers started. They didn't come from behind me or above. They came from inside my ears. Too close, too clear. They said my name. They said my thoughts. Then they said things I hadn't thought yet. He doesn't know what's buried beneath Marker 12. The next ranger comes tomorrow. Make room. That last one hit cold, 'cause I realized I was being phased out, not killed, replaced, like a file being overwritten. Piece by piece, I ran toward the old marker posts. Reached Marker 12. It was gone. Dug up. In its place, a hole. Fresh earth. Empty. Waiting. Episode 15. The new ranger. I didn't climb into the hole, but I stood at the edge for hours, staring into it, waiting to see if something climbed out. Nothing did, until I blinked, and then he was there. A man, same uniform, same boots, but younger, eyes too still, skin too clean, smile too early. He didn't speak, just stared, then raised a hand and waved, like I was being dismissed. I turned and ran, back to the cabin, back to what was left of normal, only it wasn't my cabin anymore. The photos on the wall had changed. Different people, different ranger tags. On the desk was a new logbook, different handwriting. But when I flipped to the last page, I saw my name. Final entry. Ranger Tom cleared. Status. Archived. I checked the mirror. No reflection. Not gone. Just missing. The radio crackled to life. Welcome, Ranger Elliot. That wasn't my name, but I answered anyway. Outside, a new truck was pulling up. I opened the door and smiled at the man getting out. He looked tired, just like I had, just like I was. And somewhere, deep beneath the floorboards, I heard footsteps descending.